if there was music to your intro, what would you want to be playing?
Oof, that is a great question. I think what you're asking me is, what is the audio brand of me, Pierre? And I think my sort of background is a very international one. I've lived in a bunch of places all around the world. I've worked with music from all around the world. I'm very passionate about everything that's about sort of fusion of cultures and everything like that. So I guess I would imagine it as something that's quite universal, maybe mixing some influence from various places, a bit of Middle Eastern, a bit of French where I'm from, a bit of electronic, this kind of thing. Hard to put a finger on it. I'd have to explore it kind of in the studio.
So the question is, would it be a song or would it be instrumental that encompasses what you just mentioned?
Most definitely instrumental.
Instrumental.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it because it's hard for you to pick a language that you feel represents you, or you're more drawn to music?
I think both of these things. I think, you know, I do work also quite a lot with sort of international music, and definitely language can be a bit of a barrier to communication. And I'm a strong believer in the power of music in itself as an emotional communication tool. And I think that's perfectly done with a great piece of instrumental music. That's probably what I would go for, I'd say.
So for those who don't know who you are,
yes,
Pierre Carnet.
Fantastic pronunciation.
You're the managing director for MassiveMusic in MENA. Do you also look after other regions, or are you primarily focusing on MENA?
I primarily focus on MENA for MassiveMusic, which is a global business. So we've got about a dozen offices around the world. We have other people who do cover other regions of the world. For me, I've been in Dubai for about 3 years, and I really focus on bringing good music and sound to brands and entertainment across the MENA region as a whole.
But you've been with Massive longer than you've been here, right?
Correct. Yeah, 5 years. I started off in Amsterdam, which is where our global headquarters are. And then about 3 years ago, moved to Dubai to basically open up our business in this region. Historically, we have been doing a bit of work in the MENA region, but kind of on a, let's say, a one-shot kind of on-off basis. And I moved over here back in 2022 to really sort of build our business in this region, and also do my part where I can to support building our industry in this region, which is the music for brands and music for film industry primarily.
Are there different disciplines to MassiveMusic outside of MENA, or is it the same, just, let's say, Latin America or Asia or Europe?
So the positioning of the company of MassiveMusic is we're full-service music agency for brands and entertainment. So we do music for advertising, we do audio branding, we do music for film, television shows, even events. And as a result, wherever you go, sort of in our different MassiveMusic offices around the world, we're able to do composing, music licensing, audio branding, voiceover, whatever it is that a brand or a filmmaker might need. But what you will find, going to your question about local specificities, is based on where you are in the world, will definitely be delivering more on certain services than others based on what's most needed in that region. So for us over here in the Middle East, something that we'll do a lot of is audio branding, because we're lucky to be in a part of the world where there's a lot of brands that are really growing very quickly with very big, even global ambitions. Whereas, you know, if you go maybe to some of our offices, other offices, we might be a bit more focused on bespoke music or on even audio post-production, these kinds of things. But at the end of the day, the idea is that you get more or less the same everywhere that you go, but in effect, we are doing a bit more of different things.
Gotcha. The world. And how much education, since this is kind of an, you know, emerging market, how much educating are you having to go through with certain clients? This
is a big part of my job. You know, it's not an easy job.
I can imagine.
We sell ideas and intellectual property. It's quite intangible, actually. We're not out here selling washing machines, right? And so definitely a major part of the job, wherever you go in the world, is getting people to understand the value of music, whether that's in terms of just purely the financial value, but also looking at things like, what's the value in terms of the importance that people are attributing to it? Music is a very powerful tool, as you know very well. It can be used for a lot of things, for influence, for communication, to create beautiful art, for a lot of different, very valuable, very valid purposes. But I think the average person will say they like music. I've met some people who say they don't like music, which is always shocking to me.
Yeah,
but most people like music.
Yeah.
Most people think that they appreciate music. But when it comes to the business side of things, when it comes to actually selecting a composer that's going to make music for a film, selecting a piece of music that's going to feature in a commercial, creating, you know, your audio brand that's going to express your brand's value across all of your marketing and communications. Often the passion doesn't really match up with the way that people value it in reality, whether it is how they budget for it, the time that they take for it, or even, you know, I'm sorry to say, sometimes the respect and the way that they interact with creators and musicians who are actually delivering this service. You know, we still have to deal, and this is not a MENA specific thing, this is a global problem, with people who consider music as an accessory, as a, you know, a side tool,
commodity,
that's a commodity,
yep.
that's supporting something else that's bigger and that's more important, and kind of miss the idea that actually music can be the transformative factor that really makes the difference in the scene of your movie, your ad, or whatever it might be.
Before we get into the challenges that you face for MENA specifically, since like we said, it is an emerging market, and the thought process around it and how to attach value to something that would otherwise be, you know, you've been used to doing things a certain way and now you're having to kind of rethink. I kind of want to backtrack a little bit and find out more about your upbringing as it pertains to music and how you caught the bug and kind of how you got into music making and all that. So I'd love to start from wherever you feel is relevant.
It's a long story. I'll try and keep it focused.
This is your space. No, but this is your
parts.
space. I do want to know kind of the motivation, kind of what got you here, because it could be happenstance, it could be deliberate, it could be a hybrid. Because I imagine that some or at least one person listening to us or watching us feeling like they're at a loss, and then they might not know with what Massive offers, and you know that could open up I could do this instead of, because you think traditionally, when you're into music, you either want to be an instrumentalist, you want to be an artist, or you want to play in a band, right? So you don't exactly think you could, you know, use them in different ways. So that's kind of why I think it's important to really share your experience and background.
And I thank you for giving me a great starting point, because this is exactly where I was when I was in my early teens, which is I got into initially music production. I have a bit of a background as a child learning some piano and various bits and pieces, but I really started getting into music production early teens, maybe let's say 13, 14.
While in France, I imagine? Or
actually, in those days, I was living in the UK and then in Singapore. I was very lucky to have quite a sort of international childhood, which definitely helped shape also my taste in music and arts, with sort of a lot of influences from a lot of different places. And what I started doing was actually music production for hip hop, which works very well with that logic, because obviously hip hop is a type of music that sources from everything else, right? And you know, anyone who's listening who is a hip hop fan will know that some of your favorite songs have samples from strange Georgian traditional music,
super experimental.
Exactly, right? So I think it's a fantastic genre that allows you to explore other things. But going back to sort of the initial story, I think the motivation when I started off for me was kind of as you described, which is, you know, I was in sort of international school environment, growing abroad. Obviously, you know, you're surrounded by a lot of people who are very ambitious, who have big ideas, but a lot of those are focused on, you know, working in business, making a lot of money, getting to travel the world, this kind of thing. And for me, I've always been passionate about things that make you dream and that kind of transport you to other places. I work in music now. I'm also very passionate about film and kind of was looking to start my career in that initially.
They're not that dissimilar, you know, because it is suspension of disbelief, right? It triggers imagination, right? It takes you to places that are otherworldly. And so you get to scratch that itch, you know?
Agreed, which is what I love about most forms of art, actually, which is just taking a break from the stresses of life and just moving into something that's immersive and that's taking you to different places. And that's something that I think really motivated me to get into music production back in those days, and also looking to maybe see if I could build a career outside of the norm of, you know, going through sort of the more classic, let's say, business routes that maybe a lot of my friends in sort of my teenage years were looking at. So hip hop music producer, mostly just bedroom producer back in those days. I moved back to France to study at university. I actually did go and study business, but I spent a lot of time in my business school really just working on music.
And did that factor into what you're now doing?
100%.
Okay, that's great.
Because basically what happened is I ended up working on music mostly by myself and with friends and as kind of an entrepreneurial venture.
By way of YouTube tutorials, or like what was the gateway into learning how to do it?
YouTube tutorials, a lot of PDFs downloaded from shady websites that explain how to do things.
Yeah.
I'm sure, a lot of people have been through that. I actually never took much of sort of a formal training in music. I would not say that I'm a fantastic musician, but I would say that I understand music very
sensibilities.
well. And I understand the process of producing music and the sensibilities very well.
Has that done anything to you in terms of your confidence when it comes to either approaching projects or producing? Or at what point, I guess, did you get to a point where like, that doesn't matter? My sensibilities is kind of that's kind of my North Star, and that guides me through the process.
I think when it comes to me personally, I've always been a bit of a risk taker and a bit of a yes man, let's say. So I'm always happy to go and try new things. And if there's a challenge where I'm not too sure how to go about it or how to solve it, I'll still take it on and say yes. This has been kind of a constant throughout my career, including coming out here to live in the Middle East and build a business. Before I moved to Dubai to come here and build our office for the region, I'd been to the Middle East, I think 3 times.
I remember you told me.
Quick business trip, kind of visiting. Don't speak any Arabic. Not super familiar with the culture. Obviously, in the meantime, I've taken the time to really sort of learn about it and get immersed in everything, and I absolutely love it. But going into the unknown is something for me that's really exciting, and that also applies to how I developed back in those days as an artist, where I was kind of the producer guy. I was working mostly in hip hop in the Parisian scene back then. And, people would come to me and say, oh, well, I need to record the song. I don't have a recording engineer. I'd be like, okay, give me a week and I'll buy a microphone and then I can be a recording engineer. I had, one memory, which is very dear to me. So I had a hip hop sort of crew, a collective back in those days. My style has changed a lot in the meantime, but I used
French
to wear
the
hats and the long t-shirts and all that.
What years are we talking here?
This was in like early 2010s, around there. And one of the guys in this hip hop collective was part of sort of a music competition in Paris. And he got to the final of that competition, where he was going to perform at the Bataclan, which is one of the big music venues in Paris. As part of a couple of tracks between other artists to sort of show what he's got and see if he could win. I don't remember what you'd win, some kind of a label deal or something like that. And he was like, okay, so this is big for me, and so I want to do my hip hop performance as a live band actually this time, and not just with a DJ and a backing track. So in the group we had drum player who was great, a guitar player
this is
who
live.
was fantastic, full live. Guitar player who was fantastic, a keyboard player who was better than me because I'm a piano player, but I'm okay, but this guy's really good. So we had the full band except for a bass player. No one knew how to play bass. And so he was like, well, let's go find a bass player. I was like, well, I'm here. This thing is in 2-3 months. I'll get some classes. I'll buy a bass. Give me 3 months. I've got 4 songs to learn anyway. I can make it work, and you kind of figure it out. And I think that's kind of been my approach, whether it comes to sort of music and art or whether it comes to business as well, which is to go into things, take a risk, try to be confident and just figure it out. And sometimes it works out. Sometimes it doesn't work out. In the end, I was not a fantastic bass player, but it was okay because
according
it kind of
to you or other people's feedback?
According to me.
Okay. That's all that matters in the end.
Always be the harshest critic. And this is kind of the mentality that I try to work with, which is try new things, experiment. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. When it doesn't work, it doesn't really mean much about you and who you are. It's just maybe there's other things that will work better.
Did you have any aspirations to be a rapper yourself?
Not so much.
And you knew that right off the bat?
I think so, because first of all, I come from quite a fortunate sort of background, and I don't think it would have matched with sort of what rappers were back then.
You want to talk about the hardships? Yeah. It's not exactly a hard knock life, right?
No, growing up in Singapore, it didn't really work. But also, and this is even something that's true in my job today, I do like being the kind of behind the scenes guy. I found quite quickly that my strengths lie not necessarily in being the star in the show, but in helping other people succeed and facilitating. And that's even what I do in my work today, which is, an essential part of our job is to basically be the interface between the music industry, labels, indie or big, composers, sound engineers, instrumentalists, singers, and so on, and the clients who are going to give them opportunity and who are going to feature their music and content and get them paid at the end of the day. And this is what I'm really good at, which is being kind of that interface and supporting people who I recognize have a bit more sort of, we could call it talent, or let's say artistic instinct than I do, in making the most and getting the most out of that talent that they have.
I think that saved you a ton of, I mean, maybe if you knew that early on, great, because some people struggle a bit before they find their lane, as it were. I don't necessarily believe that you need to stick, but once you know, I feel like it's a blessing.
Yeah.
Like for me, it didn't take me long to know what I was into. It's just that I was into many things that are kind of in a similar field. So that helped me a ton, because I've seen and I still see people that struggle. They are they're passionate about multiple things, but they're really at a loss for direction and, where do you start? Especially now that you have access to so much information. So it sounds to me like you knew early on, you're like, this is kind of my thing. This is kind of where I want to be. I'm a problem solver. I'm a facilitator, and I'm making the most of it.
For sure.
What problems do you enjoy solving the most?
I think, of course, what brings a lot of joy is like seeing the output, right? Being part of creating something that's beautiful or that makes people happy or that stimulates a certain amount of emotion. Of course, that's going to be very rewarding. More on a personal, let's say maybe slightly selfish level, what brings me a lot of joy and a lot of motivation is actually being able to also help people. I love it when we work with a composer and we finish the project and they're happy with the results, they got paid, but also they give us feedback saying, it's been a great experience working with you guys. I'd love to do it again. You were very supportive, very clear. You really helped make this into a success for me. And I think this is just something that's like on a personal level. There's a bit of like that recognition that you appreciate, but also helping other people to kind of achieve things that they want to do,
You're turning dreams into reality, essentially, because I mean, if you think about it, as a composer or an artist or a sound engineer or a voiceover artist, you provide for them what they've always dreamed of being able to do without needing a 9-to-5 or what have you. You know what I mean? Like I've gone through that cycle myself, and it's a dark place. So when I say dreams, I mean, you think of anyone that's in that creative space, what do you wish you could do? I wish I didn't have to do anything else and only had the space to do that. So
100%.
Kudos to what you and your team do. I think it's invaluable.
Appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. And that's 100% true, which is, I do believe that there are some exceptions out there who are just superhuman, but I think for most artists, they should be allowed to just focus on their art and not have to worry about business, not have to worry about finances, not have to worry about marketing themselves. They should be able to focus on their vision and on expressing whatever they're looking to express in their art. And that's something that's really important to me as well. And that's kind of what we do, being that interface between, let's say, the more kind of business and production world and the talent at the end of the day who's actually creating music and basically making it comfortable for them to work so that they don't have to be worrying about dealing with difficult clients, dealing with timelines, negotiating contracts, and all of this. And rather they can just focus on making sure that whatever they're going to create is going to be the best possible representation of their skill, of their talent, and, of course, also the best match to whatever the project is that they're working on. Sure.
If you had to describe, without throwing anyone under the bus, or it's kind of a double-edged sword, describe a perfect client that you're servicing via the roster that you work with. And the flip side of that is describe the perfect artist that you represent in terms of being on time. Like if you could, again, it'd be nice because, one of the things I learned early on is it takes an art to manage, but it also takes an art to be managed. So when you find that, give and take it's the perfect scenario. So you're kind of the, the go-between, you're the facilitator. So yes, you are representing the talent, but you want to make sure that your client is getting their money's worth. And it's not just about money. It's not transactional. They have a vision. You're helping them shape that vision. So you're kind of the translator of what the client wants and what the composer or the artist is providing.
Sure. So just to sort of set the scene here, types of projects that we do, I mentioned before, we do bespoke music for advertising or film and TV, audio branding, music licensing, which I think is a slightly different category. So looking at sort of audio branding and bespoke music, whether it's for brands or whether it's more for entertainment, film and television, I think the best clients that we have are the ones who are willing to actually trust the experts. It's so recurring that we'll meet with the CMO of a big brand, we'll meet with the creative director of a leading agency, we'll meet with a director who's working for a big production company, might be working on a Netflix show or on his next big movie. We have our first meeting, and the first thing they'll say is, okay, but you guys are the experts, so guide me, show me the way. And then we actually start doing the project, and they'll be micromanaging every single aspect of the project, getting opinions and insights from other people. We've had projects fall through because the chief marketing officer of a brand showed the music to his kids and they didn't like it. And he came back, he was like, I tested it with my kids. Wasn't that good. Let's start over, right? And so there is a difference between that initial interaction when people are like, we're going to trust you, and the reality of it where they end up micromanaging every single step. A big part of our job is also to make that manageable for composers and the talents that we work with. So I think the best kinds of clients are the ones who are able to also recognize their own limitations and to trust the expertise of the people that they hire. And I think this applies not just to the work we do in music, it applies to everyone,
of course.
Everyone who's in the creative space, because that's when you're going to be able to give the best of what you're able to do. And this means trusting your partners or your suppliers, both, of course, on the creative level, where are we going artistically with this piece of music, but also listening to them when it comes to things like the time that you need to do things. We work under a lot of pressure, especially when we're working for brands. Film and television, longer projects, a little bit more comfortable. Doing music for an ad, often you've got 2 weeks or less to make something happen. And if you want to compose a really good, thought out piece of music, 2 weeks is not actually a lot of time to do that. Maybe you're going to have that spark of inspiration and get it down. But at the end of the day, if you really want to take the time to explore, you need a little bit more time. And so this is, I would say, is the best client.
For deliverables, is there an average length of piece that you're delivering? Under 10 minutes, under 5 minutes?
So if we're talking about audio branding specifically, which is different to music for campaigns. When we make music for campaigns, we've got one film, one ad, maybe it's 30 seconds long.
So it's a finite, you're delivering against a finite.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
30 seconds, maybe up to 60 seconds long. And there our objective is going to be, let's create or find the best piece of music that's going to tell the story and bring the right emotion to this creative piece of work, right? When we talk about audio branding, it's very different because there what we're doing is we're looking to create basically an ecosystem of assets that the brand is going to be able to use over a long period of time in a lot of different places to create something that's memorable and recognizable and kind of immersive for their customers. So, we did all of the sounds of the RTA here in Dubai, for example, which are quite recognizable for people who take the metro because they're exposed to it every day for years on end. It's not one of ours, but if you think of like the Emirates boarding music, something that's, people relate to. And similarly, it can get adapted to different places. One of our biggest projects is the TikTok audio brand, where the audio logo is really the piece that's become very recognizable over time. So the approach is very different and the deliverables are very, very different. Generally, when we're looking at audio branding, there's going to be 3 main deliverables. I'm going to get a bit nerdy on sort of branding for a minute.
It's important. It's kind of your...
It is my space.
Yeah.
There's going to be 3 main things that we create. The first is something that we call a sonic DNA. You could call it a brand anthem or a brand theme. This is the main piece of music that tells the story of the brand. Think of I'm Lovin' It from McDonald's, for example.
I was literally on the tip of my tongue.
It's the classic, right? The reason why I call it a sonic DNA is because as much as audio branding in the past might have been the Intel Sonic logo or just an audio signature, people used to call it a jingle even sometimes. These days, it's much more of an ecosystem. And so that sonic DNA allows us then to create a bunch of other assets that can go a lot of different places. We can take the main melody from it, like McDonald's does in that example, and do a version with a ukulele, do a version with a whistle, do a version that's maybe a little bit more corporate for corporate settings. Maybe we can take 1 or 2 notes from it and turn it into an audio logo. Maybe we can take specific sounds and turn them into UX sounds for apps or for devices. Or we can make a loopable kind of ambient version of the song for phone lines that brands can use.
It's a brand guideline, audio,
correct,
sonic identity.
Yeah. So we tend to focus on a sonic DNA, an audio logo, and some guidelines actually, which are just written as the base. But then it can go in a lot of different directions. We've done work where we create sort of immersive versions for spaces, where we create sort of 4-bit adaptations for products that will be playable on a washing machine. It can go in a lot of different places from there, but the core is really with those kind of 3 main assets. And that sonic DNA is a full piece of music that's usually between 2 and 3 minutes.
Yeah, gotcha. So that's on the client side.
Yeah.
Describe the perfect talent that you represent or you negotiate for.
The perfect talent, first of all, is good at their craft. This is obviously the most important thing. We are not going to go and represent or sell the services of people who are not fairly advanced at what they're doing. Because, as MassiveMusic, particularly, we do work with a lot of the biggest brands and production companies in the world. So we have a certain quality standard that we have to uphold. So we do select our talent, handpick quite seriously based on the quality of what you're doing. Secondly, we'll want people who are specialized. A lot of music agencies out there, they'll have 2, 3 in-house composers that do a bit of everything. Now, I know how to produce music, as do you. My background's in hip-hop music. I can open up my workstation and create a reggae song if you ask me to. It's not going to be as good as someone who's been living and breathing reggae for 20 years and performing as an artist in that space, right? So the way that we operate is we look for people who have specialties where we can also guarantee that they're going to be really good on the brief that we bring them in on, which might mean you're really good at making trap music. You're really good at doing Hans Zimmer style, orchestral, emotional or epic piece, whatever it might be. But that is much more interesting to us than generalists, actually, because a generalist is never really a generalist. It's just someone who has a specialty, but can also do other stuff, right? And then the third thing that we'll want is, to a certain degree, people who do understand also how non-musical people think. So that you can translate. Correct. So we do take charge quite a bit of that kind of translation work and being the interface. I've had feedback of clients who say things like, it needs to sound more sunny. And then how do you translate that into musical terms, Right. We do a bit of that work, but at the end of the day, the composers and the talents that we work with, they have to be able to take feedback, at the very least from us. We try to make the feedback as digestible and applicable for them as possible. But definitely, some artists who are a little bit kind of boneheaded and fixed in their vision, that's not going to vibe so well when it comes to, let's say, work for hire kind of situations, because you do have to have that flexibility and that ability to listen, understand feedback, and implement it correctly. And that's very important if you want to be successful as a composer or a musician for advertising, film, television.
Since you're working with people who are fairly specialized, I mean, you're lucky if you say, look, this is it. And they're like, excellent, this is exactly what we had in mind. How do you address number of edits, length, etc., deliverables? Is that on a case by case? Is it based on tenure, whether it's a new client versus clients you've worked with in the past? Or
generally, it's much more simple than that, which is it's a matter of cost, time,
gotcha.
And scope of work.
Okay. And so that's factored into your quotation.
So let's say we have an agency that's going to reach out to us because they want to compose a piece of music for a commercial. Within that quote, we'll make very clear, here's how much it costs. Within that budget, you have, let's say, 3 revisions of the track until we have to land on the final product. If we don't get there, then we're going to charge you more because we're going to charge for that time. This is not only something that we do to protect the artists and to make money for them and for us as a business, but it's also to actually try and get the most out of the clients. Because if you know that you're going to be limited in how much you can go back and forth on this, you're going to be putting a lot more effort and thought into making sure that the feedback that you give is considered and is valid and really goes into detail as to what you want. Whereas when we don't do this, then you might end up doing 25 rounds of refinements where maybe round 10 is just going back to where you were at round 5 because you realize you're going in the wrong direction.
Right, true. What's a typical brief, or is there such a thing? Being in the Middle East, I'm sure you get the typical, or the stereotypical, I should say. Are you able to, do you have a good balance between a typical brief and things that are kind of out of the box approach or ways of thinking?
So there's definitely some recurring themes in the different spaces that we operate in. So we do a lot of hit music licensing, especially for the brand world, where big brands from this region will want to use a famous song in a commercial. That's something that's very appealing to brands in this part of the world. Often they want to make a cover of a famous song in a specific style. That we have to deal a lot with, I would say. A lot more than in other markets, where typically, for example, in Europe, there's a lot more attention that's put towards working with independent music, and kind of, brands look to be tastemakers and culture makers. In this part of the world, generally, the strategy tends to be a bit more, let's leverage things that people already know and try to reach a really large audience.
So you want something in the vein of XYZ?
Correct, yeah. So this a lot in the licensing space. When it comes to the audio branding space, we work with a lot of companies that are UAE, Saudi, Qatari companies.
So you're servicing the Gulf and North Africa as well?
Yes, though still a growth region, I would say, when it comes to the more sort of specific aspects of brand music and audio branding. And there is definitely a recurring brief from a lot of our local clients here, which tend to be brands that were born in the GCC, but which have global ambitions, right? So if you think about the airlines that are here, if you think about the national tourism companies, entertainment brands, hospitality brands, these are all companies which may have been started here, but really have the ambition to become global icons. And many of them are succeeding in doing so. And so the recurring brief from a lot of these companies, when we look at audio branding, which is all about creating music that's going to represent you as a brand, is we want something that's global, that's modern, that appeals to international audiences all around the world, from Asia to the US, to Europe, to Africa. But we want to have elements in there that are authentically from our culture. And so typically in Saudi, this will mean specific instruments, specific chord variations, using kind of the musical structures of, we've even gone into detail where we've had briefs where people ask us to reflect the specific sounds of different regions of Saudi Arabia. We did some sonic branding work for an Omani, for a National Bank of Oman about 2 years ago. And we had to spend a month working on claps because there's a very specific way of clapping in traditional sort of Omani tribal music. So that is the most recurring brief, which is finding that balance between doing something that's global, that's appealing to international audiences, but still has a really genuinely authentic local element in it, which is something that I think is really unique to this region. Because, I did this job for a while in France, in the Netherlands, working with the UK, with Germany, a bit of the US. No one ever came to me in France saying, we want to be international, but we want to have an accordion because it sounds French. This is not really something that happens.
Yeah. How are they similar, and then how are they different across regions when it comes to Massive Music? Like, is Massive Music France, for instance, focused on being as French as they can, or how does that work? The localization, I guess, of your efforts.
It's a good question. I think generally what's quite nice in this company is we do have quite a consistent international culture. We do work in a niche space, right? Particularly when it comes to music for brands. When it comes to film and TV, that's maybe a little bit more accessible. Music for brands, most people that I meet, I explain my job to and what I do. They're like, oh yeah, I mean, of course that exists, but I never thought that there were actually people doing this, you know? So we work in our niche. We're a very big business within that niche that's developed quite quickly. The company is about 25 years old. And so a lot of the people that are there when it started are still there. A lot of people build long careers within the business and move around within different countries. So as a result, we do have quite a sort of consistent international culture, which is focused on effectiveness and quality with our work, but also creativity, passion, fun, and just enjoying music. So a vast majority of people that work for MassiveMusic, including in sort of our accounting teams or HR, are musicians or somehow involved with music, you know, as maybe they manage a band or maybe they have their own sort of indie label that they're running or something like that. So everyone is consistent in that we're all passionate about music and we're all passionate about the work and the space we're in. But then definitely there's going to be local adaptations based on where we are in the world. So for us in the Middle East, we definitely have one of the more localized teams, I would say, out of anywhere in the world, because we do deal with a lot of briefs, like I mentioned, that really have that local cultural aspect and specificity. So our team here has, you know, we have people in the team who are from Saudi, from Egypt, from Lebanon, and still growing and kind of ticking some boxes, but representing the wider region. Whereas, let's say in the US, for example, the team might be a lot more diverse and international because we have much less of that local, historical, and cultural aspect that we have to deal with. Personally, I find it very exciting to be in a part of the world where we do really get to dig deep into local culture, and especially such a rich and kind of diverse one, which for me was really a discovery. You know, being not particularly familiar with the Middle East a couple of years ago, and then coming and really discovering the region and discovering that, you know, even within countries of the region, there are vastly different musical traditions in different regions, different cities, and so on. And I find this absolutely fascinating. So personally, I love it. And I think it's very special and unique to this part of the world.
Yeah. And then organizationally speaking, for MassiveMusic, is each region divided in similar disciplines? Or like, for instance, you're a team of 5 to 7-ish?
7 right now, yeah.
If you were to break down personnel, is it the same, say, in the next neighboring region, or does each region have a different layout, I guess, for the organization?
Yeah.
How is that decided?
It comes back to one of the points we addressed earlier, which is depending on where we are in the world, we'll have different types of work that we do more or less. So typically, for example, music supervision and music licensing is something that's very new to our region here, right? And the whole concept of music rights and royalties and all of this
work in progress.
Is you know, we're making a lot of progress, but it's still very, very new. Whereas, for example, in our London or Amsterdam offices, we might have several people that are working as music supervisors and licensing experts. Here, you know, we hired our first music supervisor, and I hope you get to have him on the podcast sometime.
Would love to.
About a year ago. And as far as I know, he's one of the only person in this entire region that has that job title. It's very new, right? So it does vary based on where you go, because at the end of the day, the types of work that are prioritized change. And as a result, we have to adapt our teams and the structure of our teams.
Gotcha. What does your team here look like in terms of who does what? So you manage the region and the team?
Yes. These days, I'm mostly in a managerial role. You know, I came here 3 years ago, and it was just me, kind of doing everything, going out, meeting clients, trying to build and promote the brand, doing some sales, handling some projects myself. I do have a background also as a music producer and a music supervisor myself. Now I've been able to grow the team here, where the team can have the fun stuff of actually doing the work. And I spend most of my time really sort of managing and figuring out strategy and all of these things. And so within that team, we have one music supervisor who is in charge of everything that has to do with music licensing. We have two music producers. Now, important nuance here is that the way that we define a producer is more in the way that, let's say, a film studio or an agency might define a producer. A music producer at Massive Music is not a music composer. A music producer is someone who works with the composers and oversees the work that they do.
An A&R of sorts, I guess?
A&R meets like executive producer, kind of, if that makes sense.
So a vision more so than actual hands-on. They're not exactly doing any arrangement or...
Correct. So their job is...
Are they at sessions?
Yes, for sure.
Yep.
Their job is to be in charge of the artistic and musical outputs of the business.
Yep.
So this means they're in charge of keeping track of all of the composers that we have in our roster, bringing in the right ones on our projects, and then managing that process from end to end, including on the creative and artistic side, but also on the budgets and timelines and this kind of thing. Really making it easy for composers to work is the idea.
So it's a collaborative effort between them and the composers and or other producers?
Sure.
Right, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, they also work with any talent, by the way, who might not be composers. Could be voiceover talent, could be singers, rappers, specific instrumentalists, if we need an oud player for a project, for example. That all sits with the producers, of which there are two. Then we have two sort of project account managers who will sit on the other end of the equation, and they'll be the ones who are interfacing with the clients mostly. So dealing with overall project timelines, setting up presentations, setting meetings, doing the whole back and forth. You know, we do work with very big brands, very busy people. There's a lot of people management and client management to take care of. And then the final person is what we call director of partnerships, which is essentially a head of new business. So really focusing on sales and putting the brand name out there and bringing in some new clients.
And so you'd mentioned earlier that you have staff, composers, and you work with, you outsource.
Mm-hmm.
Are you constantly on the lookout for new talent? And the reason I'm asking for that is, let's say someone were interested in working. Yep. So you mentioned one of the criteria being that you need to be specialized and you need to be pretty advanced at what you do.
Sure.
If it's not for your producers and or by networking, you come across these people, how would someone that meets that criteria, what's the kind of, how do they get connected to what you guys are doing?
So firstly, I would always encourage, and you know, you were talking about this a little bit at the beginning of our conversation, about sort of the diversity that exists in the music industry in terms of opportunities. Everyone starts off wanting to be, you know, a singer or a composer. Then they grow up a little bit and everyone wants to become an A&R.
Yeah. Because it's cool.
Yeah, because it's cool and you get to go to shows for free all the time.
Yeah.
But in reality, there's so much more to that world, right? And what we do is help open up for musicians that side of the industry where you're doing, you know, you're getting your music into ads and movies, you're composing for specific projects. And this is often something that's a little bit undervalued, I think, by a lot of musicians. I think they don't realize how much work there is to do in this space and also how much they can gain from it, whether that's in terms of exposure, experience, network, or even just in terms of financially, in terms of getting paid. So I would always encourage any musicians, any artists to look into that space and see what they can do. And I would also encourage them to try not to see working for music for a brand as selling their soul or anything like that. It's more, you know, you're complementing what you're already doing with additional work, an additional stream of revenue. And also the way I like to put it is like, if you do it well, and that's what we try to do, you're helping to make the world sound better. No one wants to watch TV and just hear terrible music all the time, right? And so you're doing your part. So to your initial question, which is, how do people actually get into that space? if they want to work with us, on our website, there's a contact form where you can share your portfolio, anything like that. Myself and my team are also very receptive to people who reach out to us by email, on LinkedIn, on social media, whatever it might be. And basically what's going to happen is whichever channel you reach out to us through, your portfolio will end up with our production team, who monthly have a meeting where they'll review 50 to 100 different submissions that we get from different talent, and decide who we want to onboard as composers or as talents that we work with. If we do decide to onboard, let's say, a composer as someone we want to work with, the way that works is they're not a staff member, they're not salaried or anything like this, but we basically make an agreement with them, which comes in the form of a contract, which says, we would like to work with you. If we have a project for you, here's how it's going to work. Here's the timelines that we're going to work within. Here's how much you're going to get paid. Here's how we split the usage rights. Here are some of the rules around confidentiality, and also some rules around what you're doing compositionally. So typically we'll include things like not allowed to use samples, because we cannot be selling music to our clients where they might get sued afterwards. Right now, we also include that they're not allowed to use AI to create original music, because that's not really something that we're necessarily ethically aligned with at the moment. And let's see how that space develops. So it's quite an easy process. If you've got the goods, like we'll be interested for sure. And then you're in a setup where you're on the list. If something that's good for you appears, it'll come your way. And in the meantime, you're welcome to do anything else that you like. Even if you want to go work with our competitors or go and pitch for some brand music projects yourself, that's absolutely fine. But you're a resource that we can access, and the other way around as well.
Sure. So it's a non-exclusive agreement,
correct,
or understanding, I guess. Is there more talent than there are clients or pitches or briefs, or
I mean,
so you're very selective with who you work with, obviously. Have you been faced with a situation where you've got more work than you've got resources to plug into?
Yes, most definitely, especially in this region. I mean, obviously, there's like internally our teams and our staff who have a certain bandwidth, and sometimes we're lucky to have been quite successful in this region. And there have been times where we actually have to decline projects because we don't have the time to take it on.
Gotcha. Time or resources? I mean, time is a resource, but
it's kind of both. Right. Yeah, but if we're looking at the talent themselves in terms of like composers and artists, I would definitely say that there's an imbalance, at least in this part of the world, in terms of the number of projects that need good music and good talent, and the good talent that's available. I think there's a lot of talented people out there and out here. I think maybe some of them need to learn also to professionalize a little bit in the way that they approach these things. You know, if you're working for a big brand or if you're working for a big film studio, these are serious businesses, and so you need to approach things professionally, which includes writing a professional email and, you know,
delivering
having a
on time,
professional process, delivering on time, these kinds of things. But it's evolving. But definitely, like, there are times where we have requests for specific types of talents that are really hard to find. We had a project last year where we were asked, so it's brand commercial, and we were asked to find a Saudi female rapper who was in her mid-30s, because basically she was going to dub in a commercial where it's a sort of a mother character that's rapping about the product. Extremely difficult to find because there are female rappers in Saudi, but most of them are a little bit younger. And in the end, you know, we had to find an Egyptian talent who was able to do a decent Saudi accent, because that talent just doesn't exist. So it's evolving quite quickly, but I would say there's definitely specific talents that are missing, and also a lot of great talents out there who might want to look into professionalizing the way that they approach these kinds of projects, because working with a brand or working with a film production studio is very different to working with a label or with an event venue, actually. These are not people who are part of the music industry, and they're not in that scene, they're not in that dynamic, and they tend to have strict objectives that they need to hit, and you need to show that you can help them achieve that.
Gotcha. In terms of publishing and residuals, I know it's fairly new to this part of the world, but if you're a talent that's affiliated with Massive in other territories and hopefully here, is it sustainable? Could you do that exclusively and make a decent living? Is there enough work where conceivably you have enough work on an ongoing basis?
I think, I mean, in most parts of the world, yes. I think in this region, it's still a work in progress.
Is that largely due to the lack of
rights, infrastructure when it comes to rights and royalties? Because obviously royalties, so we're looking at sort of this being developed now in the UAE, but until now, there's been basically no system for royalty payments anywhere in the region, as far as I'm aware. And music rights themselves, separate thing to royalties, are generally undervalued as well. So I meet a lot of composers who are based like here in the UAE or who are based over in Saudi, for example, who will, you know, do work for hire, let's say for a commercial. They will usually undervalue themselves. You know, they will do that piece of work for anywhere between, let's say, 10 to 20,000 dirhams, which I would argue is fairly low when you compare it to the standards in Europe, in the US, or in some parts of Asia.
What would be the equivalent of something like that here? So something you do for about 10 to 20 would be what in Europe?
In Europe, I would say you'd be looking at maybe 60,000 at the very least.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So there's a good like 6x
difference for sure. Plus, you would add the rights on that.
Okay.
And a lot of the composers that operate in this region, they don't have anyone charge for they don't charge for their rights because they're not registered anywhere as a composer, and they don't register their music. And so they get paid lower than they should for production, and then they let their clients own the music. Whereas what they should be doing is registering that music with a PRO so that it's copyrighted, it's protected, and then they can sell the rights to the clients if they want to, or they can license it to the client, in which case they remain the owners, right? So the difference that you're looking at, if we're really talking about numbers here, is, and I'll put this in US dollars because I think it'll be a little easier. A composer in the UAE will often get a budget of $3,000 to do music for a campaign. That's it. That's all that they make.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Work for hire.
Correct.
The second you deliver, you own nothing.
Correct. And then their clients own the music. A composer.
Quick question here. Sorry.
Go ahead.
If they were registered, if they had all their T's crossed, I's dotted, would that give them better leverage? How much of it is because they're not set up versus the clients aren't used to? So let's say I'm a composer and you're a client and you're like, okay, I want this. How much is it going to be? And you say 5,000. They don't know any better whether you're registered, but like, and they say, okay, that's too much. And you're like, oh, but I also want X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
How much of them on the client side know that if they are registered, it's going to cost more? Do you know what I mean? Like from an educational standpoint.
I would say no one knows and no one cares when it comes to the client side, if I'm honest. So there's a culture thing there, right? And at the end of the day, there's a culture and there's an ecosystem thing there as well, right? Which is increasingly what we're starting to see happen now is that things are becoming professionalized in this space in the region, and people are starting to charge their worth for the work that they're doing. So it's evolving. As long as you still have 50+% of composers that are doing things, let's say, the old way, it's not going to change, right? But once the majority starts doing this properly, rights,
then
the way they charge for their time,
no longer have the
then the rights no longer have the clients no longer have the choice to sort of go for the cheaper options, right? And there's always going to be people who try to undercut others. But what happens is, if you're the one who's 90% cheaper than everyone else, you're going to be the one that people ask questions to. Like, why are you so cheap? What's wrong here? Whereas until now, what's been happening is that companies like ours have been the one that's more expensive than everyone else. And so we get the questions. Why are you so expensive? What's the reason for this? And then we explain, because we want to pay our composers properly, because we have a proper process that's tied to this. We will lose a lot of projects based on this, because at the end of the day, you have $3,000, you have $3,000. You're not going to be able to add a zero just because I want you to, right? But as the industry and the ecosystem evolves, that has sort of a trickle up effect, I guess, to the clients, where they will start budgeting better with music as well and aligning a bit more with standards we're seeing in other parts of the globe, which, going back to your initial question, right now, $3,000 in the UAE, compose a track in 2 weeks, no rights. In France, same thing, let's say $10,000 to $15,000. Plus you charge for your rights. That might be another 10 to 15 if the thing is going on TV. Plus you're making money on royalties every time that it airs on TV, which get paid back to you through the PROs, which might be even another 10 or 15. So you're looking at, adding a zero basically at the end of the day compared to sort of the situation that's here. And then it becomes very sustainable because actually you can do 3 projects a year and you're done. Whereas if you're a UAE-based composer following sort of that low-cost approach, then you have to do 4 projects a month, every month, or like you can't pay your bills. So
if you were doing that exclusively, essentially.
Correct. Yeah.
That's crazy. and sad also.
Sure.
But there's also, we've got this other elephant in the room, which is AI, which you touched on. How do you see that factoring into what MassiveMusic does or companies that are in the similar space? So
obviously AI in music and AI in general for the arts is a big topic. I work with people who are involved in all kinds of artistic ventures, film, photography, music, of course, copywriters even, right? And everyone's feeling the heat and kind of trying to figure out what the future holds. When it comes to music, it's a little bit the last bastion, let's say, because of the complexity of music, right? I think it's much easier, I'm not an AI expert, but my understanding is it's much easier for an algorithm to study a piece of video and to be able to reproduce it rather than to understand the complex structure of a piece of music just by listening to a music file, right? Which might have 10 instruments playing at the same time. How's it able to identify that and kind of recreate it in a way that isn't just mush? But now we're starting to see that technology really evolve, where it's been a couple of years that the algorithms have been learning, and they're starting to be able to put out music which is possible, if not quite convincing, actually, at this point. So how does that affect us in our industry? Right now, what's happening is it's still quite early days. AI is something that's being explored by clients and brands, film directors, and so on, but they're still having a hard time getting exactly out of it what they want. But it's starting to compete with, let's say, the low-cost options of the industry. So things like stock music, library music, where you don't necessarily need that high quality or that human touch.
Or super customized, like we want. Yeah.
And so then you could go to AI instead of going to a music library, because the AI will allow you to do something that's custom, though not necessarily superhumanly custom. Instead of just going through for a library track that's already been used 1 billion times, and it'll probably cost you about the same, right? Might take you a little bit longer figuring out the prompts. Good. In the future, personally, I'm quite convinced that it's going to continue evolving. We live in a tech world. We've both grown up with probably one of the most transformative periods for humanity and technology of all time. And what we've seen is that when people try to stop the progress of technology, they always get left to the side. I mean, even in music, right? When you remember piracy, downloads, all of that, no one was really able to do much against it there. Sure, a couple of people went to jail and got fines and whatnot, but it still continued. And it just slowed down when the music industry found an alternative, which actually was better for people than piracy, which is streaming. Arguably less good for the artists than what existed before.
Good for some, not so great for the majority, unfortunately.
Sure. Yeah. The point is, no one's able to stop it.
Yep.
And even right now, a lot of these AI music companies are getting sued by major labels because they've been training their algorithms on the music that these labels own. I'm sure they'll be able to get some money and they'll be able to possibly sink some of those companies. We'll see. But there's other companies and there's other algorithms and there's other people, and it'll progress. And so my point is, I'm convinced that in the future, that's not necessarily very far away, there will be AI systems that can create very high quality, convincing music where you can't necessarily tell the difference between if it was made by a human or if it was made by an AI, particularly in music genres, which are very sad to say this because it's where I come from, but loop-based, things like hip-hop, EDM. Maybe it'll take a little longer for things which are a little bit more organic, classical music, rock music, whatever. And so it is something that's a threat, I think, particularly for composers, because, you know, we're talking about remuneration for composers earlier. And at the end of the day, brands, production companies, film studios, they want something that's good, but they also don't want to spend too much money on it if they can. And if you give me the option as a film director to get the same thing for $200 with an AI or for 30,000 with a human being, as much as I care about human being, I'll probably go for the $200. Not me personally.
Yeah, no,
that's
I get
image,
it. But you know, there's ethics, there's sustenance, there's a bunch of things at play here. My feeling is that we're going to go into a super. I feel like the value is going to be in the curation more so than the technical ability.
Yep.
So then you're paying for taste as opposed to, you know, especially now, like everyone with a phone could be a producer. Sure. Everyone with a phone could be a photographer. What makes you any different, you know? So it's not going to be an easy thing to solve for, but it's a new challenge to solve for, I guess.
Yeah. And in our field, you know, a big part of what we do also is telling people what they need. Just because you give a brand director and a big brand a tool where there's a text box and they can type, make me a happy corporate clapping song with a ukulele, they're not necessarily going to be able to like figure out that brief or to customize it in the right way. And so I think like it's quite scary. I definitely think like some composers need to be worried. If you're not at the top of the game, it's going to be something that's really competing with you eventually. But I also think it'll open up, to your point, some new venues. And you know, like my partner right now, she's in the AI space, and she does film and images with AI for advertising as well, actually. And it's, you know, she shows me what she does, and it's a skill, and it's a trained skill. And I can't do what she does. I can open up ChatGPT and ask it to make a picture, but it's not going to be the same as what she's doing, because she's able to get the lighting right, get the nuance, position things as they should. And I could see the same thing happening with music, where you might see a new breed at some point also of producers and composers who are using that in a way where maybe you and I, who didn't catch on to the train at that point, wouldn't actually be able to do it as well. So it's a balance. Personally, I am a little bit concerned about what it does mean for artists, because I do feel that most technological evolutions that we've had in music over the years, whether it's, you know, digital workstations and plugins, auto-tune was a big one that everyone was sort of panicking about back in the day. No one's going to be able to sing anymore. A lot of these things actually just ended up being tools. We still have singers, and we still have composers, and we still have pianists, even though you can open up Contact on your laptop and put a piano there and click in the notes if you feel like it without any sort of technical ability as a pianist. This technology, I do feel like it might be a tool for some new things, but I do feel like it generally does replace some aspects of the art.
Yeah, it's capable of far more. It's exponential. It's not a multiplier. It's, but you know, I feel like you mentioned, I think we'll find a way to coexist or not. I mean, who knows where things are headed?
We'll see.
But yeah, I feel like it's one of those things where we're being asked. Things are moving at a much more rapid. The acceleration is just hard to keep up with, no matter how on top of things you try and you know, and be.
Yep.
It's just something you have to go with the flow, you know, because it's a choice. I feel like you could panic and say, oh, that's it. Or you can say, let me see what I can do.
Yeah. For us as a business, we're kind of in between the two at the moment, which is, you know, a big part of what we do, and we talked about this quite a bit earlier, is we value the rights of composers, of musicians, of artists. And a big part of what we do is making sure to protect them, get them opportunities, get them paid. And right now, the ethics of the whole sort of music AI piece is a little bit murky, and really the message is coming through is it's competing with human beings and not necessarily giving them an opportunity to adapt from any of them. Additionally, there's some legal issues, which we kind of touched on, where we cannot be going out there selling music to our clients that's made by programs which are not 100% legally safe. When we work with composers, as we said, we have a contract that really details like no samples and all of this. We know that we're selling something that's legit and that no one's going to have a problem. We also, for example, make sure that we never do sound-alikes, which is when someone wants a Kanye West track, but they can't afford it. And they're like, please make something that sounds exactly like Kanye West. That's something you can get sued over, right? And so we right now, ethically, we are kind of just and legally just kind of like waiting it out and trying to figure out how to use this in a way that is healthy for the musicians, that is healthy for the music industry going forward, and respectful. There are some companies that are doing AI music in an ethical way, actually. I know this company here in Dubai, I haven't spoken to them in a while, so I'm not sure how they're doing. There's a company called Mubert, and their whole thing is we do music with AI, but every single sample and every single track that's been used to train our algorithm, we have a contract from the author of that piece of music that gives us the permission to do that. And we even have a deal with them where we give them some royalties if the music is used that we basically train from their tracks. So that could be a way, trying to do things in a bit more of an ethical way, where also music's kind of feeding the AI, but then the composers get paid.
A real tool, yeah.
Correct. So, it's a bit blurry right now. We're kind of waiting it out, but sometimes I do feel like we're missing things are moving too fast and you're kind of missing the boat a little bit. So
true. On the ethics, it's easier for an artist or a composer or a creative to sympathize and to be a defender of composer rights. How do we get people who don't know much about music to kind of join that thought process, that it's something that someone spent a ton of time on, especially if you're talking like people who went to a conservatory, spent 20 years perfecting their craft? And what can we do, I guess, to bridge that gap?
I think this is very, very difficult to do, because at the end of the day, most people are busy. They have their own lives. They have their own jobs. They have a lot of things going on, and they don't have time to be empathizing with other people's problems. Sure, there are some quite extreme situations where we all empathize. There's many problems in the world that people will rally against and try to help. Fortunately, art has rarely been one that really gets a lot of people riled up to sort of really make a difference. It does happen on like a medium scale, but it is quite hard to enact change with these things. Even recently, a couple of months ago, I believe in the UK, the Parliament was debating some laws around music and AI, and basically just leaving free roam to kind of do whatever. And all these famous artists, there's Paul McCartney and people from various bands, Elton John and so on. They all signed a letter saying like, no, we disagree with this. They released a concept album, which was like a quiet album, basically saying like, this is, you're silencing our voices as musicians. And it made a bit of noise, but like to me, because I work in that industry, but I think the average person doesn't hear about these things. So I think this is a really, really tough challenge. And I believe and this might be a bit of a pipe dream, a bit of a hope, but I think at the end of the day, the main way to get people's attention and get people's hearts is just to show them the value of what you do. And so the more we have musicians who continue to make fantastic, unique, emotional, human music that's good quality, that speaks to people, that reflects their unique experiences, these are the things which will be much more difficult for an AI to emulate, because it's not a human being. Having some mistakes and unexpected things that happen, again, like not a tech expert. My understanding is it's very difficult to program randomness into an algorithm. It's always going to be a repetition of something. It's difficult to program a random mistake, something surprising, something new, something different. And a lot of the songs that we love, they're mistakes there which became which became iconic, right? And so I think the way to do it is to just double down on, let's make good music and show even more than before the value of being creators as human beings, and leave a space for AI to fill a gap for the more generic stuff, which is absolutely fine, because at the end of the day, it's also to a certain extent in the interest of a composer to not be spending 2 weeks making a generic sort of corporate track that's going to be used in a social media ad, if they can be focusing on other things which are more creatively or financially rewarding to them. But it's who knows what will happen, and I have hope in people, but sometimes you get disappointed.
One of my favorite quotes that I've kind of carried with me is, "In the face of uncertainty, there's nothing wrong with hope." So
I like that.
Yeah. Because when you have nothing else, I think it could be a difference maker.
Agreed.
A sensitive subject, maybe. I both love what Hans Zimmer has done to music and film, but haven't loved how Hollywood or filmmaking or, that side of the industry has reacted to it. Because now suddenly, it's good that you're so good that you want something that sounds like you.
Yeah.
There are a lot of Hans Zimmer clones.
Sure.
But I feel like that's kind of really said, like, if it doesn't fit in this particular sound, we don't want it. So it leaves little room for experimentation.
Yeah.
What I love about him is he does experiment a fair bit.
Sure.
He has a sound, he has a signature, grandiosity, all that stuff. But I feel like it's kind of narrowed down it's like, use your creativity, but don't go, you've got this lane and this lane, don't go to the third, fourth.
Yeah.
What's your take on that as it pertains to, because, I'm sure you have to deal with a lot of composers that are having to deal with specifically Hans Zimmer, let's say.
So I think Cornfield Chase is probably one of the references that we get the most from our clients. And also, by the way, Hans Zimmer is technically one of our competitors, because obviously we pitch on projects for film. Increasingly, he's been moving his company, because what most people don't know is Hans Zimmer, of course, still a composer, but he has a company now with a bunch of composers who are very talented people who work for him and go out with his brand name, which is very recognizable. But it might not always be him who's actually composing the music.
It's his stamp of approval.
Correct. It's his approval. Much like when you work with MassiveMusic, by the way. It's the brand of MassiveMusic. We have a quality promise, but it's not that one guy that you're going for, right? So to your question, I think my analysis of this actually is one just of trends. So when I think it was The Dark Knight was the one where they had all those big horn hits, right? And then we had like a decade of every single action Hollywood movie that was just every single time, like the big horn hits. Then, there was sort of Cornfield Chase and everything with Interstellar. And then we had a period where everything was kind of like emotional. But even outside of Hans Zimmer, right? I think we're at the tail end now of like a decade of movie trailers, which are sad covers of famous songs from the 60s.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And it's just trends at the end of the day. And we cycle through them and we go through them. And that's fine. What I would definitely sort of encourage, though, is, being in the trend is good, obviously, especially if you're a brand, if you're a film studio launching a movie, you want to appeal to the zeitgeist and to whatever people are into in that specific time. But one thing that we generally do also try to push for, especially when we're talking about things like audio branding, is let's analyze the trends and let's see how we can do something that bends off of that trend, actually, because then you're going to be the brand, the film director, the movie, whatever it is, that's possibly understanding that moment, that trend, that zeitgeist, whatever it might be, but it's taking a bit of a turn and you're going to stand out and you're going to be a little bit different. And to do that, whether you're a film director, whether you're a brand, whether you're an ad agency, it takes some guts and, it takes some risk to be like, okay, we're going to do something different. But a lot of the time, what's going to happen is you're going to reap the reward of that, because every single one of those trends was started by someone who did something different, right, compared to the previous trend. And so this is something that we'll always be encouraging our clients to do, which is, let's look at what's going on. We can go down that route, but what's a way that maybe we could take it slightly different and not do 100th sort of sad cover of the Beach Boys or whatever it might be.
Do you see it as a blessing or a curse? So let's say in your encouraging a talent to do something else, then that becomes the state of the art. Has that person been blessed or cursed? I mean, blessed probably for a good period, because at what point does it become a curse?
Blessed for a short time and then cursed for a long time, because then you're just the guy who does that, right? I think with a lot of musicians, you know, this is even like outside of my space. If you speak to people who work in labels and project management for labels, it's important to have a good timing on when you're going to switch up your brand a little bit, and you're going to switch up your identity a little bit and try something new and something different, which again is a risk and takes some courage, right? We have a lot of artists who've tried and it flopped completely. I mean, personally, I remember Lil Wayne's rock album. Like that was, you know, I liked it back in the day when it came out, but it did not land at all with the greater public. And
it's really difficult to pull off.
But, you know, there are others who've been more successful at doing this and sort of changing their brand and their image. I think when it comes to sort of the space that we work in, it is a strength for composers actually to be identifiable as an expert in a specific field. Because at the end of the day, when you're looking at work for hire, occasionally it might be passion work, and you work on a really exciting project that you get to be creative with. And those are also the projects we try to bring to the talents that we work with. But also for a lot of composers, it's work. It's work that you're also doing to get paid, to make money, to put food on the table, to pay your rent. And if you have a strong brand where you're the guy who's really good at doing, let's say, a Hans Zimmer style epic, a sort of big horn track, a lot of those projects will come to you. And this is also the way that we work with our composers, which is if we've had a real success with a composer in doing one thing in a specific genre once or twice, as soon as we have a brief that's in that field, we know that they're the guy to go to, because they're going to nail it, because they've nailed it in the past. And they're more than happy to do it because it's more wins for them. And if I'm honest, less of a challenge, because they're operating in a space where they're already comfortable. I think on the artistic and creative side, curse, because you want to be able to explore and to change. But if you're looking at things purely as a business venture, actually it's a really good thing, because it allows you to have some recurring business and to be identified within the market.
Absolutely. What would you say are the biggest challenges to the region outside of, let's say, the legislative side of things, like that not being on par with the rest of the world? What would you say are some of the biggest challenges you're facing?
So when it comes to music, I think one thing that's a challenge still, but that's improving also very quickly, is just the community. You know, it's something that I noticed when I came over here, which is like at our MassiveMusic office in Amsterdam. Every month or two, we'll be hosting a live band from Amsterdam to come and play, and we'll invite a bunch of musicians and also other sort of industry, film, and ad people to come. And inversely, we'll be spending time at the Warner Music office for a live show that they're doing there, or a networking event that's happening in a local studio, and so on. And everyone knows each other, but everyone spends time together. And so even with competitors, there is an exchange and to a certain extent, kind of a collaboration. We're all in the same boat. We're all in the same battle here, which is we're trying to promote the value of music and the value of this art, right? And in this region, I think until recently, it's been very disconnected when it comes to people in the music industry. I also see it in a lot of other industries, to be honest. Like advertising, same. There's maybe one or two events every year in Dubai where like the advertising community gets together, and that's it. But when they do, it's fantastic, because they can talk about their experiences, exchange insights, complain about their clients, whatever it might be. And it's great. But hasn't been happening so much. It's something we've been trying to work on a little bit. So we've started our own events with MassiveMusic called Remix, which is something that's we pay for that's completely for free, where we book out a place, bring some DJs, and it's just for people from the music industry to come and hang out and spend some time and talk to each other about what they're doing, the challenges that they're facing, work things out together, maybe meet some new people, find some new opportunities, right? Obviously, there's XP Music Futures now that's been happening in Saudi for the last couple of years. Outside of these, there's really not a whole lot going on, right? And I think having that community, whether it's on a local level, let's say in the UAE or in Saudi, or on a regional level, because at the end of the day, the industry is still not that big in this region. It's growing very quickly. I believe we're the fastest growing region for the music industry again last year. So it's growing very quickly. It's still quite small. In our space, I'd say in the entire region, there's maybe somewhere between 5 to 10 companies that do what we do. In only the city of Paris, I can name at least 25. There's a lot of space to grow.
Yep. What do you think that's a function of, supply demand wise?
I think there's definitely a sense of competition that people have, which is not always justified. I think we should do a better job at seeing each other as peers and not as competitors who are trying to sort of one-up each other. And that's even something that you feel with peers in the industry who are not even competitors technically. We're trying to show, okay, who's the bigger person here. It's not very healthy. I think it would be nicer if we could come together a little bit more, and which increasingly is happening now, and support each other basically. And I think a cause of that is what we were talking about before, which is how hard it is to make money and to build a career in music in this region until today, where we're seeing very rapid change and evolution, which is fantastic. But of course, if you're in an industry that's kind of a struggle industry and a competitive one, you're not necessarily going to want to hang out and play friends with other people in the industry because you're too busy trying to figure things out by yourself and trying to do better than everyone else. Right?
Yeah. On the subject of hope, what keeps you hopeful?
In general?
In general, looking ahead where things are headed, what you're doing, what this part of the world is shaping up to be, whether it be Saudi 2030 or Dubai/UAE 2040 and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Is there something that you're like, that excites me or that gives me hope?
All of the things that you mentioned, for sure.
Yep.
I think if I was to sort of summarize it, so I'm originally from France. I spent some time in Europe growing up studying, but also abroad in Asia and the US and so on. So I've had a bit of an experience of sort of how different cultures are and how they are today. And one thing that I love about this region, and that gives me kind of hope and brings me a lot of positivity actually in my day-to-day is, I love like my country where I'm from. I love going back there. But something that's really tough for me is whenever I go back, a lot of the perspectives towards the future are very negative and rooted in fear, rooted in worry. People are worried about climate change, or worried about conflicts and wars, or worried about social issues which are being blown out of proportion, differences, all of these different things. And one thing that I've really loved from the moment where I stepped foot in this region is that in general, at least in most of my experience in the GCC, I will say, the perspective of the future is a positive and an excited one. Where people will say, look at all these things that we have coming. Look at what we're building. We want to bring the World Cup here. We want to build the biggest music studio in the world. We want to grow the music industry and promote and sign local artists and make them into global superstars. There's so much like ambition and energy and kind of a feeling that nothing's really impossible, which I find to be really inspiring. And to be honest, like impacts me even like on a personal level quite positively, because when I go home, I might be a bit tired from my workday, but like I feel good. Like there's going to be more to come next week and the year after, and there's so much happening and it's exciting. Instead of coming home and being like, oh, there's all these things I have to worry about, and like I don't know where the world is going. So, and that comes from a lot of the things that you mentioned, whether it's the Vision 2030, the initiatives that are happening. The infrastructure that's developing now in the UAE for the music industry is fantastic. The fact that local talents are really trying to professionalize themselves and find new opportunities. Even the fact that like our competition is increasing in the region is something that's a positive for me, because I'm like, this is great. We're building an industry. We're building we're building a landscape here, and we're educating people, and that is something I find really inspiring, and that gives me hope.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that. That's very well put, and I think having that globalist, let's say, perspective, because you and I share a lot of that. You know, having grown up and moving in different places and moving around, you get to really compare. You know, there's things I miss about being in France that I wouldn't be able to get here no matter what happened. You know, so there's definitely something, and that's unique to France, and there's something that's unique to here. But I like that it's a constantly evolving, forward-thinking, hope-inducing place. It still leaves some things to be desired, where you can go to other places to kind of get, but that is very exciting, and I like the way you framed it. What initiatives is Massive involved in, or is there any kind of thing that you're working on this year or next year that you kind of want to plug or maybe shed light on?
Sure. I think there's a couple of things. So obviously, like we said before, if there's any talented musicians who are listening, please reach out to us. I do feel like we are still short on local talent. And this is something that's really important to us as a business, and also to me personally, to help in the development of local talent. You know, we do a lot of talks and interventions about to train people about how to price your work, how to take care of your rights, how to get opportunities in film and advertising. So that's the first thing, which is, if anyone who is in that space is listening, whether you're a composer, whether you're really good at playing a specific instrument, whether you're a singer, you're a rapper, a voiceover artist, even a sound engineer, we'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, there is one thing that actually is quite interesting and close to my heart. We have a global initiative called Balance the Mix, which is something that we started within MassiveMusic. It's an initiative that was started based on the insight that less than 10% of music producers worldwide are women. And so we started this initiative with the objective of running events, workshops, doing what we can in terms of media and PR and so on, mentoring, to help to promote the place of women in the music industry. And it's something that I find really interesting. I've been to one or two sort of sessions about women in the music industry in this region. And I'm sure it's the same in many other parts of the world. This has very little to do with this region specifically.
Geography, yeah.
And the only people who are there are women, speaking to themselves in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic. But at the end of the day, if the problem is that the deciders are not women,
it's perpetual, yeah.
You're going in circles, right? And so a big part of this initiative is connecting the dots between women who want to grow in the industry and the people who are actually already there and who are established. We've spun off earlier this year that initiative actually as a separate business, and it's not even a business; it's an NGO actually. So it was spun off as basically a charitable organization.
It's a nonprofit, right?
Yes, nonprofit, correct. And we just did our first event here in the Middle East about 2 weeks ago. We did it over here at Firdaus Studio in Dubai. It was a workshop run by women for women. So this goes a bit against what I was just saying, but it was more focused on like production skills and sort of learning the details of producing in a studio. When I talk about sort of getting people involved also with men who are in the industry, I think that becomes more about career advice, career development, understanding the industry. And this is something that we definitely want to continue working towards, whether that's here or on a global level, because one thing that I think is absolutely essential when it comes to art is to have diversity of thought and diversity of opinion, whether that's in terms of gender, ethnicity, culture, whatever it might be. I think the best surprises come sometimes in the most unexpected packages.
Absolutely.
And so this is an initiative and a cause that definitely I would want to plug and support. You know, if you're listening to this, look it up, check out Balance the Mix, or you know, if there's anyone who has, you know, friends who are female who are looking to get into the music industry, I think it's so important to like encourage them, try and give them that opportunity, because what we've heard from a lot of women is that it was really hard for them to decide on a career in this industry because no one was encouraging them or taking them seriously when they said they want to be a music composer or a music producer, for example. And that's something that's just so sad. I think everyone should have the opportunity to work in something they're passionate about. So yeah, Balance the Mix, definitely something that's quite important.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, man.
Thank you.
We'll do another one of these, hopefully when there's more to share. And I'd love to talk to anyone on your team, whether it's a producer, music supervisor, to increase awareness and you know, just spread the goods. Music, you know, #1 passion of mine. So
absolutely. Also mine. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, man.
Appreciate it, Zan.
Right, cheers.